Oh, hello, friend. Getting myself a little more comfortable. Here I am looking at my face, and I may not know who you are, but I have the image of people, individual people, that come to me in my meditation practice. I bring them into my awareness so that my practice is always shared, it's always lived. There's many, many people included, each one an individual, each one on their journey. And in that sense, I'm talking to you as an individual on your journey. And today I want to tell you a story about me, something I've lived recently. But before I go into that, I want to frame it in the context of the cultural turmoil around the notion of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. With the election of Donald Trump and his administration, DEI policy has been attacked. Um, and arguably, the notion that something like diversity, equity, and inclusion would be imposed on institutions, on educational institutions, on schools, on, on, on corporations, I don't agree with that. I don't think that kind of thing should be imposed. However, there is a way to say it's a mistake at the level of policy without burning down the more essential understanding that DEI is not just a mental construct, it's an intuition and expression of our understanding of the very nature of the natural order. Let's just think for a moment of a forest. I live in the country, well well outside a city in North Carolina. And there's all kinds of life around us, water life because we have a large pond adjoining our property, but all around forest. And in the forest, there are many trees, not as many as there used to be, because this is not original growth. Nevertheless, at least 6, 8, 10 different species of trees. And then there's the overstory, the canopy of those trees. But on the ground in the forest, there is the undergrowth, the small growth. It doesn't need so much life. And all of these plants have their roots in the soil. And then the soil is filled everywhere with funguses that link every root of every plant to each other. It's like a network of highways of communication. And in amongst all that in the soil are billions, trillions in a cubic centimeter of bacteria and tiny microorganisms. And the more diverse, the more kinds of trees, the more kinds of undergrowth, the richness of the soil with mold, the funguses and the bacteria and the other organisms and the small animals, the healthier the forest is. And the forest doesn't say you need to be diverse. Nature made every living system incredibly diverse. I mean, the very structure of matter is diversity. The periodic table of the elements, 92, 94 elements that are natural, and then another 20 something that human beings have learned to make, all assembled from protons and neutrons and electrons in various forms. And they assemble themselves into molecules and eventually into the spiraling molecule of DNA, into chromosomes. And even though chromosomes are made from three particular acids, amino acids, in intricate combination, out of that, you and I show up, and so do mice, and so do bacteria, and so does everything that's alive. And everywhere diversity, And in terms of what each thing needs for its existence, there's absolute equity. The forest doesn't argue about who gets more air or more oxygen. If the soil is healthy, it's aerated naturally by all the little things that move around in it. And it's not arguing about moisture. The moisture is there in accordance with the environment, the ecosystem of the particular forest or the particular uh, prairie or plains. But wherever you create monocultures, wherever you poison to get rid of diversity, then you have disease, then you have weaker crops, then you have crops easily succumbing to disease, then you have masses of chickens that by the millions have to be culled because of bird flu. And you see that human beings do not understand being able to live in a world of true outer diversity. Now we're getting into territory that gets complicated because the point I'm trying to make is diversity, equity, inclusion is an intuition of the way our universe operates, the way life is formed, the way the solar systems exist, the way the galaxies exist. And that has an intelligence that we can only say is divine or transcend. It's beyond comprehension. It's irreducible. And you and I are that in our very form, in our very molecular biochemical structure. And this brings me to my story. I discovered in the end of October when my PSA was elevated. That's the prostate specific antigen. And I knew almost immediately that I had prostate cancer. So, without going into all the details of the progress through that, eventually I decided to have my treatment and learned everything that I needed to learn by going to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, North Carolina. That's the original campus of the Mayo Clinic. And the Mayo Clinic is a fascinating institution. When I was there were rooms dedicated to photographs of the current working employees and others from the past. They came from every race, every nationality, every religion. There were people in turbans, women, Islamic women. They were part of the staff, part of the doctors, part of the working thing, working organization. Everywhere you went, there was a sense of multiracial, multi-ethnic, multinational, multicultural individuals who had all been drawn to this one place. And of course, this was set into motion by the original man who, in the 19th century, started the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Mayo, and then he had two sons. But he raised them in the notion of you can't just stay in one place to learn. He urged one of his sons to go to one medical school, and another son, who was a few years younger, later went to a different medical school. Then they came back and joined their father in the practice. They were influenced by the religious group that prays together and is against war. I love it when my brain drops out information like this, but if that pops in, I'll throw it in a minute. So from the get-go, as they learned, as they treated people, and they treated everyone, they invited people to learn with them. When they heard someone was doing something interesting in Boston or in Baltimore, they visited those places and studied with those people, or they invited them to their own place in Rochester. And gradually, a community of people dispersed throughout the United States, sharing information, sharing knowledge. Initially, all men, but eventually it became women doctors. And then the first hospital was built by an order of nuns that partnered with the Mayo family, the Mayo brothers and their dad. And that's to this day, the main hospital there at the Mayo Clinic. And fast forward to now, and I'm there, walking down the road, coming back from one of my radiation treatments with my wife, and I hear two men talking in a language I don't recognize. And me being me, I turned around and said, "Excuse me, I don't recognize the language you're speaking. Where are you gentlemen from?" They were dressed ordinarily. They clearly were different ethnic group, and they said, "Oh, speaking Bangla." I said, "From Bangladesh?" And they said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, are you here with family? Are you patients? Are you studying at the medical school?" And they went, "Oh, no, no, we're postdoc graduates doing research here, have been for a few years." There's a building called the Guggenheim Building, which is 18, 20 stories tall. It takes up a full square block, and all it is research laboratories. And I stood by that building. We walked past it every day. And I watched who went in and out, men and women, again, every ethnicity. And I just could try to guess at the different nationalities represented. The Mayo Clinic is a living example of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not because it's imposed, because it's its ethos. And that's probably why the Mayo Clinic was rated just recently by Newsweek magazine the #1 hospital in America. And it has been consistently, for decades, rated the #1 or #2 or #3 hospital for cancer treatment, and currently is at #2 or #3. It is rated by Forbes the third best large employer in America. That is the third best company to work for and work in the United States. Mayo Clinic treats over 1.3 million people every year. It is an enormous staff. And yet at every step, there's graciousness, kindness, helpfulness. One point, Kathy and I were looking for a pharmacy in a building that we hadn't yet been in. And I spotted a woman who was clearly dressed in maybe operating room clothes. She was all of about 4'6", I would say Indonesian. And I said, "Excuse me, can you tell me where the pharmacy is?" And she was clearly on her way to do something. And Kathy said, "You're disturbing her." But she said, "Oh, well, wait, look. Oh, come with me. I'll show you. I know the fast way." And she led us right there and asked if we were okay. And then she went about her business. And that's the kind of service, the kind of care at every point that we met in that place. There is a spirit in that place. And it is the spirit of diverse people who have a sense of stake in it, who are respected for wherever they go. Where did those Bangladesh men get their education? Well, it's a highly agrarian society. It was until relatively recently. Were their families, their parents or their grandparents farmers? Did they go to school there? Did they go to school in India? Did they do work in a European school, probably in England? Did they do their undergraduate or graduate work, get their PhDs in the US? I don't know anything. But at the Mayo Clinic, you are in an environment where you can taste the intelligence, you can taste the grace of it, and the quality of care, the dedication to care, and the dedication to science, and the dedication to good science. It's so well managed. It's such an experience, a wonderful experience to be there. That's DEI naturally. That's DEI emerging from the heart. That's DEI not imposed, but understood as the very nature of how any system works well and produces excellence. But then we come to something that, from my point of view, is as important, maybe fundamentally more important, because the basis of human consciousness requires an internal diversity, an internal sense of equity of the different parts of ourselves having a place and inclusion of all the different parts of ourselves. So what do I mean by diversity, equity, inclusion internally? I mean that your being is not an abstract thing. Your soul is not an abstract concept. That this mysterious thing that you are, that is life, is a dance of very subtle, nuanced sensation and feeling. Your being is arising out of the consciousness with which you understand, and the depth of your soul is an expression of the consciousness with which you have embodied, incarnated, understand, and formed a relationship with this incredible range of sensation that every human being is capable of experiencing and is always experiencing. So take the diversity of emotion. Emotion is the least diverse of the sensations because I define emotion as that which is activated by a thought. So anxiety is almost only activated by a thought. Same with resentment, same with bitterness, same with jealousy, and behaviors like possessiveness. They are activated by thinking, and the thinking creates emotions of need, emotions of anger, emotions of distrust, which feed more thinking. And so those kinds of patterns are very limited. There's not enough diversity in them. But the living organism itself is constantly a seething, moving dance of sensation. And as you get into the depth of sensation, as you get into the depth, the broader depth of feeling, there are so many kinds of feelings that are not reducible to concepts, to easy ways of describing them. And take a piece of music. Some music just laments loss and pain and hurt and failure. Some music extols, exhilarates, joy and happiness and discovery and coming home to love. Beautiful. But then the music of the deeper places inside of you. It's very hard to have a song about grief because it'll only talk about tears and loss, but grief is so much more than that. I mean, grief is like 10 different kinds of music of different genres by different composers at times, just like going mad inside of you. And you think you'll lose your mind. And then suddenly a single thought, some absurd perception, and you can be laughing, just laughing hysterically. Not because you're losing your mind, but because you've gone beyond mind. Grief is intelligent like that. Grief is a medley of so many sensations. Grief talks about the future and the past and memory and weaving and anticipation. And it speaks through us. And we can bring our attention, we can bring our awareness to these sensations moment by moment, instant by instant. We can breathe and we can include them. We can include the ever movement of it. Take something as simple as fatigue. You know, after a meal, you can be fatigued. After strong exertion for a while, you can be fatigued. After emotional stress, you can be fatigued. And all of those forms of fatigue have one word, but they're actually subtly different sensations. And if you take your attention and your awareness and you relax all the words and you say, I'm tired because I didn't get enough sleep, I didn't, and you go right into that sensation and you start to actually feel it in that connection, in that intimacy, in that love affair between your awareness and that sensation. That sensation is freed from whatever structure your mind has boxed it into with its way of explaining why you feel it. Now, there is genuine fatigue, like an animal that lays down at the end and just look at my dog over there. Imagining all human beings being able to be like that at will, you know. But I've had the experience again and again of thinking, I'm so tired. There's so much energy that's gone through me in this retreat. And when I turned inward and just relaxed and softened my breathing and gone into that sensation and said, what are you really? What are you actually? Can I experience you without mind, without goal, without strategy? And suddenly there's not fatigue. There's just moving aliveness, moving energy. Wow. I don't override fatigue by doing that. I just, the word has already boxed in the sensation and its depth. Now, that form of diversity, that form of inclusion, that form of intimacy inside of yourself, that is the very basis of intelligence. And it is what makes you an individual. Whereas if you look at yourself and you say, I'm a handsome man, or I'm an, not very attractive person, or you say I'm a male, or I am a female, or you refuse to use a pronoun, that's all mind. That's all identity. And identity based on making yourself object, becoming objective about yourself, or trying to change your objectness. That's not intelligent. Identity is the antithesis of intelligence, that kind of identity. Real identity is a constant dance with every sensation and feeling that you have in relationship to a higher order of understanding, a larger truth, always in relationship to a greater truth, a greater understanding. And for me, that's love. Identity is your relationship to love when you are afraid, when you are lonely, when you are sad, when you are confused. Your identity is that swirl of relationship. And as you deepen into that, you discover that none of these feelings hold you. They're all doorways, movements, portals into aliveness, into incarnate, embodied aliveness. And you begin to feel continuous sense of joy, the body of enjoyment, the body, I call it the body of love. And it's exquisite. And having cancer doesn't do anything to that. Yeah, it was a little uncomfortable at times to have a difficulty urinating after the radiation, but I've been hardly touched by the whole process itself. A little bit of anxiety when I saw the result of the PSA test, and I knew instantly, oh, I probably almost certainly have cancer. And then there was all the steps along the way to the treatment that brought me to Mayo Clinic, and eventually to radiation therapy and so forth, which I just completed, as I think maybe I said, just a few days ago. But at no point was I a person who had cancer. This body that transforms from a baby to an adult, that goes through a form of, birth, transformation, aging, death, this transformational body has cancer. But I don't have cancer. The I am doesn't have cancer. And it isn't beholden to that. I understand why people, the notion of the war on cancer to me is crazy. It's just silly. It's the love with cancer, right? It's the love with anything. It's your relationship to love if you have Parkinson's. It's your relationship to love if you have cancer. It's your relationship to love if you have emphysema. It's your relationship to love if you have, heart disease and distressing arrhythmias. It's your relationship to love that is your identity, that is your individuality. And individuality is not identity. When people have identity, they behave individualistically. If you have a woman who's individualistic and her husband who's individualistic, they are always, always in conflict. And if you are a child growing up in that, you can't understand what it is because you haven't yet formed enough of identity to have lost your individuality, your essential individuality. not just the individuality of a body that's one of a kind and never comes again. Even with identical twins, they're not completely identical. Um, so when you're caught in identity, then you're individualistic. Then you're always fighting against other identity. There's always conflict. But when you're an individual, you are a relationship to sensation and feeling. That's the very essence of your being. And then your mind becomes a servant of that intelligence. I call that intelligence overall heart intelligence. It's present moment intelligence based and grounded in the body, in sensation, in feeling, and in the constant relationship of your awareness with that feeling, of that kind of attention that touches softly into your very existence as it moves and changes like weather all the time. Now you are an individual, not only biologically, now you are an individual because that seething, playful, swimming, flowing movement of sensation and feeling is uniquely you. And while everyone can agree on certain kinds of feelings and certain kinds of sensations, it's in the total dance of all that that you are absolutely individual. But if you're in the dance of that, you know that every other individual is in the dance of that. And if you are a man who is an individual and a woman who is an individual and you happen to be a father and she happens to be a mother, you are in a relationship of ceaseless discovery of each other. You are a living field, I call it a third consciousness, of ceaseless movement as you discover the other and they enter you, they permeate you, and you enter them and permeate them. And now, if you are a child growing up in that environment of individuality and intelligence, this is the most wonderful expression of divine order that human beings can live. This is the most wonderful expression. This is a reason to have children. To have children so they'll grow up and be like you know, crazy. To have children that see in you an ever-moving flow of learning and discovery and self-expression, of touching each moment, of delighting, of being astonished, of being in wonderment. That's what you want for your children. And they'll find their way to make it in a living in the world. But making a living will be only incidental to how they live the making of the living. And in that, we have the kingdom of heaven on earth. In that, we've achieved the very purpose of what we're here for. This is the invitation. It's why if you don't have a spiritual practice, you will feel so lost and you will cling to identity and you'll end up living patterns of emotional reactivity over and over and over again. And you'll give away power to some tyrant that says they'll keep you safe. You don't want to be safe. You want to know what every sensation that has the quality of unsafety and insecurity is and feels like until in the dance of relationship with all that, there's no such thing as being unsafe. There's no such thing as being insecure. Literally, no such thing. It's only the marvel of sensation and feeling and your relationship with it. Now you are unique in the universe. That's what to live for. And if we can impart that to the young, if we can live that as mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandfathers, and we can impart that to the world of our families and to the world of our communities, that's how you can't impose that as a policy of DEI. It's an innate understanding of DEI. And that's miraculous. I could keep going on, but I hope you get the energy of it. And you're never be afraid to find out what you're feeling. And don't believe your mind when it tries to tell you what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. Don't listen to that stupidity. Go there, into it, feel. And in that process, your resistance to life will be burned away. Just burned away. You'll just be in flow with life wherever you are. It's the flow of walking through the Mayo Clinic and going to its museum and hearing, feeling its history and seeing the diversity of people. The flow of getting into a lift and being driven here or there. The flow of walking in a golf course that was closed nearby where we were staying. The flow of going to a restaurant, seeing the people working there and imagining those in the kitchen and where the food came from. That constant sense of being at the center of the universe in this movement of sensation that is you, this embodied, incarnate you. And it turns out that that is literally love, the body of love. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Thank you for your attention, for your listening. God bless.